Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of Behind the Headlines. This is truly an historical week where in this programme tonight we shall be unpacking three major news stories that are shaping our world today. Firstly, we'll be focusing on the good news that the Israeli women have been released from the evil clutches of Hamas in the ceasefire agreement that Israel's made with Hamas. We'll also be discussing Donald Trump's inauguration as America's 47th president and focusing on International Holocaust Memorial as this year marks the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz Birkenau by the Soviet Red Army that occurred on the 27th of January 1945 in what will be an action-packed program. Regan, good to see you. This is quite a complicated program because each of these topics we could quite happily do a behind the headlines by themselves, but because so much is happening this week historically, with the hostages, with Donald Trump's inauguration as America's 47th president, and with International Holocaust Memorial Day coming up, thought it would be a good idea to include all these three stories in today's Behind the Headlines.
Well, what a week it has been and is proving to be already, and from the time of our recording, even as we're talking about this now, we have President Trump being inaugurated. We're looking at, even this weekend, more hostages, God willing, being released as well. At the same time, this comes in the midst of rising Jew hatred. We had a massive protest that got even more out of control than usual in central London this past Saturday, with multiple arrests and many in the Jewish community praising the Metropolitan Police for actually taking very seriously their duty and responsibility over this past weekend. But that's set in the context of, here we have the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, Birkenau, and International Holocaust Memorial Day. So it's so important that we deal with each of these, and they actually all, to some degree, relate to one another.
No, absolutely. So let's start off talking about, firstly, as a roundup. So on Sunday, the 19th of January, three young Israeli women who were kidnapped horrifically by Hamas on October the 7th, 2023, have finally been released and with their loved ones at home. We also see that they are British Israeli Emily Damari, Romi Gonen, and Doron Steinbrecher, who have now been reunited with their families, and that is a huge answer to prayer. We're also focusing our attention across the other side of the Atlantic as we've been waiting for the presidential inauguration of Donald Trump for a second time, which is truly historic, and then focusing on International Holocaust Memorial Day. But let's start off with scripture, because when we look at these historical events that are shaping our world today, especially this week, it's important that we ground ourselves in the Word of God. And Isaiah chapter 40, verses 9 and 11 is effectively a warning to the nations. It says in verse 9, "O Zion, you who bring good tidings, get up into the high mountain. O Jerusalem, you who brought good tidings, lift up your voice with strength. Lift it up, be not afraid. Say to the cities of Judah, behold your God. Behold, the Lord God shall come with a strong hand, and his arm shall rule for him. Behold, his reward is with him, and his work is before him."
He will feed his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs with his arm and carry them in his bosom, and gently lead those who are with young. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, measured heaven with a span, and calculated the dust of the earth in a measure? Weighed the mountains in scales and the hills in a balance? Who has directed the Spirit of the Lord, or as his counselor has taught him? With whom did he take counsel, and who instructed him and taught him in the path of justice? Who taught him knowledge and showed him the way of understanding? Behold, the nations are as a drop in a bucket, and are counted as the small dust on the scales. Look, he lifts up the isles as a very little thing, and Lebanon is not sufficient to burn, nor its beasts sufficient for a burnt offering. All nations before him are as nothing, and they are counted by him less than nothing and worthless.
Which I think is very apt, considering Israel's situation, considering now that Donald Trump is the most powerful man in the world and US president, and whatever he thinks or whatever we think of American power and might in the world, it's God that is sovereign. And history is his story, because he is sovereign, he controls world events, he allows leaders to rise, he allows leaders to fall. And so therefore we can have that reassurance that he is sovereign and in control of world events.
And we've seen that sovereignty play out in so many ways in the past year alone. The amount of circumstances we've discussed where we've seen almost a miraculous action in some cases from God at work. But one of the biggest stories, a story which we can rejoice in and a story that we can be thankful for, is that we now have 3 more freed Israeli hostages. On Sunday, the 19th of January, 2025, this will go down as a truly historic and emotional day for Israel and the Jewish people, as 3 young Israeli women, including a British Israeli woman, were released as part of a ceasefire agreement with Hamas. The 19th of January represented freedom for Romi Gonen, Emily Damari, and Doron Steinbrecher, who returned home to their families and loved ones after being abducted, kidnapped, held hostage by Hamas on October the 7th of 2023, taken back to Gaza and ending 15 months in captivity, 15 months, 471 days.
I mean, it is horrific. I mean, the treatment of these hostages. I'm so pleased that these young Israeli women have come home. We'll be showing scenes later how the families are rejoicing that they are home with their parents, they are home with their loved ones, and their horrific ordeal is absolutely over. But of course, there are many more hostages still to come, and this is only the first phase of the ceasefire agreement, in which we expect another 33 to be released and more hostages to be released over the weekend. So again, this comes as a mixed blessing for Israel. On the one hand, there's incredible joy in Israel right now and jubilation at the return of 3 young Israeli women that were kidnapped by Hamas. I don't know if you saw the British Israeli Emily Damari, yeah. But her fingers were shot to bits. I was watching I-24 on Sunday evening, and they said that Hamas captured her by shooting her in the finger and then killed a dog right in front of her. Then we don't know her treatment of how she would have been treated in those terror tunnels held by Hamas. But finally, she's home. But let's have a look at this excellent CBN report that gives context to the hostage deal that finally led to these 3 young Israeli women being released from captivity by Hamas.
After months of wrangling and last-minute obstacles, the hostage ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas is signed.
It's going to take tremendous effort, political courage, compromise to realize that possibility, to try to ensure that the gains that have been achieved over the past 15 months at enormous, excruciating cost are actually enduring.
It came at a price. Israel's national security minister announced his party would leave the government if it passed what he called a reckless deal, but will return if Israel resumes its battle against Hamas.
In fact, this deal will end all the achievements we were able to bring to the state of Israel.
In the first phase, 33 of the 98 hostages will be set free gradually over a 6-week period. 2 American Israeli citizens, Sagi Dekelchen and Keith Siegel, are in that group. Udi Goren's cousin, Tal Haimi, was murdered on October 7th and his body taken to Gaza. He says the agreement has to go ahead now, but has mixed emotions.
What happens when Hamas says, we can't find your cousin? Sorry, we don't know where he is. What do? Do we break down the deal? Do we have the international backup, the guarantees that we were given to make sure that, all right, if this is what Hamas does, then the deal ends?
Celebrations broke out in Gaza, and in Tehran, Iranians cheered it as a great victory for Hamas. Israelis were more skeptical.
I think on the ground here in Israel, the consensus that I'm getting is that we're all a bit confused. The feelings and the emotions are very confusing about this. obviously everybody is ecstatic about the fact that we're going to have hostages coming back home.
Israeli content creator Tal Oren told CBN News it's the context in which the deal is happening that has people asking questions.
I can tell that it's rubbing a lot of people the wrong way, and I myself don't even really know 100% how to feel, and I think that's actually the consensus in the country right now.
At Jerusalem's open-air market, feelings were mixed.
I think we lost all over with the decision we made, the agreement we gave Hamas, everything they asked for. We get almost nothing.
I'm very happy that we got our hostages back. It's unfortunate that it had to take this long, but I'm happy that we got them back. It's also unfortunate that, based on what I feel from the deal, I don't think that all of them will be released. I think some of them will still stay in Gaza.
I think it's something that the Israeli people really need now. We need hope from some direction. We need to see them back.
Well, with thanks to CBN there, and you see some of the breadth of perspective as well in relation to this particular hostage deal, as released hostages Emily Damari, Doron Steinbrecher and Romi Gonen were reunited with families at the Sheba Tel HaShomer Medical Center in Ramat Gan on Sunday night, and that's after 471 days in Hamas captivity in the Gaza Strip. The three women were the first of the 33 captives expected to be freed. It has to be stated dead or alive during the first phase of the ceasefire agreement with Hamas that went into effect earlier in the day. The women were handed over to the Israeli Defense Forces by representatives of the International Committee of the Red Cross inside the Gaza Strip. A Hamas propaganda clip released after the women left the terrorist group's control showed them being forced to accept bags of mementos from their time in captivity, including a Hamas, quote, certificate of appreciation, end quote, as hundreds of Gaza civilians looked on. And of course, there were other non-propaganda sort of pieces that showed the looks of semi-relief but trauma as well, and fear on the women's faces as they were transferred into other vehicles with men chanting Allah Akbar, waving guns around in the air, incredibly aggressive, and yet this sums up just really how this whole period of being hostages has continued. It began with cries of Allah Akbar, it's ended with cries of Allah Akbar, and you know, frankly, we serve a God, Simon, who doesn't need to have, you know, the rest of the world that convinced of his greatness just in word.
And anyone tuning in, I think, anyone seeing those TV images of those three young Israelis in their tracksuits being transferred from one vehicle to another, with the crowds then wanting to take pictures of the hostages there as well. And you see Hamas in their kind of Hamas insignia, all in black, apart from the kind of green headbands and stuff as well. Some of them wear sunglasses with their guns and everything else. I think that is the image that people need to see of Gaza. This is who is controlling Gaza. Gaza is being controlled by a totalitarian Islamist regime. And to actually give these hostages a memento of their time in Gaza is horrific. I mean, there's a map that they've given them of Gaza. They've got pictures of them when they were hostages, and then a certificate as well. I mean, it's
grotesque. It's truly grotesque, and just it adds to that trauma that they've been experiencing as well. What stands out also is that, okay, you know, this is not how Hamas has presented themselves throughout the course of this war. For the most part, you know, they're wearing their military gear. Most times they're just masking themselves as civilians. And this is part of the problem. You know, there's no clarity, there's no full understanding as to who is a combatant and who is a civilian until it's time to be seen on the big screens, and until everyone's
Hamas was sending a message to their own people with,
yeah.
with that image, saying that we are in control, we're not going anywhere, we have effectively survived the massive onslaught of the Israeli IDF, and we're back in control. So don't think that there's going to be anything different.
It's all propaganda.
We also see, for example, that the 3 Israeli hostages were taken for initial medical examination at the reception point near the Gaza border, and they were then transferred by helicopter to the Tel Hashoma General Hospital in, where's that, I think Ramat Gan.
It's in Ramat Gan, yeah.
And we have a quote here from Dr. Yael Frankel-Nir, who told local media that the woman's physical conditions was good enough to allow them to focus on reuniting with family members. And this is what they said: allow us to focus on the important thing, which is returning with their families, and to postpone delving into medical issues for a few hours. As she stated, we are closely accompanying them with their families.
Hundreds of exhilarated Israelis were awaiting the return of the 3 hostages outside the hospital as the helicopters touched down. Damari's mother, Mandy, a dual Israeli-UK national, shortly after her daughter's return, thanked everyone who never stopped fighting for Emily throughout this horrendous ordeal, and who never stopped saying her name in Israel, Britain, the United States, and around the world. While Emily's nightmare in Gaza is over, for too many other families, the impossible wait continues. Every last hostage must be released, and humanitarian aid must be provided to the hostages who are still waiting to come home. Steinbrecher's family shared a statement expressing gratitude to everyone who supported and accompanied us along this journey. The statement went on to extend a special thank you to the people of Israel for their warm embrace, unwavering support, and the strength they gave us during our darkest moments. We also extend our gratitude to President Trump for his significant involvement and support. And Gonen recorded a voice message for residents of her hometown of Kfar Varadim in northern Israel, telling them, with God's help, we will meet soon.
And I also said, this is Romi, who returned from captivity. Thank you to all of you, she stated. I don't have a clue of what you have done. I've seen a tiny, tiny part, but you're the best. I appreciate you more than anything, and I'm sending you hugs and kisses. So Gonen, who was 24, was kidnapped from the Nova Music Festival after being shot on the morning of October the 7th, 2023, while Steinbrecher, 31, and Damari, 28, were taken from their homes from Kibbutz Kfar Aza, which Regan and myself have visited. And we see that Steinbrecher is a dual Israeli-Romanian citizen, while Damari also holds a British citizenship.
Israel has said that 25 of the 33 people on the list of hostages to be returned in the first stage of the renewed ceasefire deal are still alive. 94 hostages are still being held in Gaza, at least 1/3 of whom are believed to be dead. The next group of hostages is set to be released this coming Saturday, a senior Hamas official told AFP on Sunday.
And the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs wrote this excellent report under the title, Hamas reaps the fruits of its deadly attacks. Israel seeks gains in other areas. So say the agreement to begin the release of hostages in exchange for a 42-day ceasefire intended to transition into a permanent one includes significant concessions. Say these are the concessions. These involve the release of large number of Palestinian prisoners held in Israel, including numerous convicted murderers, the return of Palestinian population to northern Gaza, the influx of humanitarian aid, the reduction of the IDF's presence in Gaza, potentially leading to a withdrawal from the Philadelphia corridor, which will be a disaster for Israeli security, and Hamas retaining control over Gaza. Says the agreement leaves Israel with mixed emotions. Joy at the anticipated return of the hostages is tempered by the frustration at such a high cost.
Yeah, it does significantly reflect the difference between the two, does it not? The immense value that Israel puts on human life, the life of its citizens, that it's willing to release 1,800 prisoners for those who are not only still alive, but there are those who are dead whose bodies they seek so that they can give them a respectful burial. There's mixed feeling on this. There are people who I have kept up with over the past year who themselves are affected by it in that they're overjoyed with the prospect of hostages returning. But one individual was speaking of how his own brother was killed by one of the prisoners who is due to be released. There's stories also of rapist murderers as well who are to be released. So Israel is here saying, please give us the, continue to think of the young children, Kafir and Ariel. Please give us these children. Give us these children under the age of 5 years old, right? And this is who we want back. Whether they're dead or alive, we don't know. This is who we want back. And Hamas is saying, oh yeah, give us this rapist murderer. That's the difference between the two sides.
And the big difference is as well is that these are not combatants. These are civilians.
Yes.
That were attacked on October the 7th and taken as hostages back to that hellhole that is Gaza. They are not kind of prisoners of war, as our mainstream media or Hamas would like to make out. They are victims of genocide and they are victims of war crimes. And so therefore the Red Cross hasn't been able to see them. They've been horrifically treated. In many cases we know that they've been sleep deprived, food deprived. Many of them haven't had their wounds and their injuries attended to. Many of them have faced horrendous sexual abuse. And
domestic slavery.
Exactly, and we can't even comprehend the kind of mental state that they're going to be in as well. But we also have to acknowledge as well that the danger now of potentially giving Hamas a political victory, that the plan was to ensure that Hamas would never have a presence or power in Gaza again, but this potential agreement allows this to happen, as we know that, for example, that Hamas still have a terror force of 20,000. Palestinian Islam Jihad have a force of 4,000, and they are getting kind of 4,000 recruits a day joining them and developing a different kind of warfare now. Now Israel's taken out 20,000 members of Hamas and their battalions. They're now carrying out tactical warfare. So this is something that we really need to keep in our prayers. Now, on to our next topic for this evening, and that's the inauguration of US President Donald Trump, who will now be inaugurated as America's 47th president, marking Donald Trump's second term in office and where he was from January the 6th, 2021 is nothing less than absolutely extraordinary.
It's incredible. We're talking about a dramatic turnaround. And who would have thought? I certainly, beginning of last year, had no thought that he would be voted in as the Republican nominee, much less that he would succeed in being president. Now, when he was selected as the nominee and Biden was withdrawn and Harris went up against, I felt, in the days leading up that it was definitely going to be all Trump. And, there's that reality of seeing how some of the former presidents have now been relating or not relating to him in the lead up to this inauguration. But the economic situation, already the markets soared on the day that he was elected, and people can say, well, yeah, an election is always good for the market. Not to that degree. There is definitely a positive perspective of his presidency. He believes in a great deal more freedom than would have been experienced under Kamala Harris in regards to free market and regard to a host of issues. You can think of just already seeing his Supreme Court and how it's been it's even showed a valuing of security, national security, with its recent ban of TikTok. Trump may reverse that to some degree, with an executive order, but it's believed that should he do that, it will involve a significant amount of oversight and ownership even by the U.S. So there's some very interesting things ahead in the next 4 years, and we should fulfill our Christian responsibility, our Christian duty to pray for President Trump and to ask that God would give him wisdom and guidance, that he would draw close to the Lord and that the Lord would draw close to him, and that he would be leading in a way that's good and godly.
Amen. I mean, there's a big difference now between his first inauguration as America's 45th president, which took place in kind of January of 2017. I mean, firstly, the world was shocked that he was president, expecting Hillary Clinton to become US president. There were question marks over his legitimacy as US president because he didn't win the popular vote. But we now find that Donald Trump's critics cannot attack him for being a delegitimate president, because, you know, not only did he won the electoral college vote in a landslide vote of all the college votes representing each state of America, the State of the Union, he won the popular vote and also won both houses of Congress as well, the Senate and Congress as well. So he comes into this presidency of the next 4 years pretty much unrivaled, unchallenged. He's been the most successful president in terms of presidential election victory results since Reagan in 1984. And so this has given him a huge mandate. And, you know, we're gonna hang on and enjoy the ride of a Trump presidency again, which we know also that many of his appointments are born-again believers who confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, will be having influence over US government policy, which is to be welcomed. But let's remind ourselves and take us back to January of 2017, when Donald Trump was first inaugurated, then as America's 45th president. And this is the signing on ceremony where he swore to uphold the Union and the Constitution of the United States of America.
The first moment a man becomes president is spent taking a sacred oath. It was no different for Donald Trump.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of my ability.
And will, to the best of my ability.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Trump, the first reality show star to ascend to the presidency, is certainly used to speaking before huge audiences, but with this speech, his first words as leader of the free world went out across the entire earth.
We will face challenges. We will confront hardships, but we will get the job done.
He definitely let the world know a new sheriff's in town, and it's going to be a new day.
We are transferring power from Washington, D.C., and giving it back to you, the people.
He didn't shy away from the downside of this moment in America.
Rusted out factories scattered like tombstones across the landscape of our nation. An education system flush with cash, but which leaves our young and beautiful students deprived of all knowledge. We've defended other nations' borders while refusing to defend our own.
But he said it's all going to turn around.
From this day forward, it's going to be only America first. America first. The Bible tells us how good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. We must speak our minds openly, debate our disagreements honestly, but always pursue solidarity. When America is united, America is totally unstoppable. There should be no fear. We are protected, and we will always be protected. we will be protected by the great men and women of our military and law enforcement. And most importantly, we will be protected by God. And yes, together, we will make America great again.
Trump's vice president, Mike Pence, one of the nation's most well-known Christian statesmen, also swore to uphold the U.S. Constitution a little earlier in the day, taking the oath on the same Bible Ronald Reagan held when he was sworn in. The crowd was filled with the new president's spiritual friends like the Reverend Franklin Graham.
Well, so that was a reminder of what happened all of the way back when Donald Trump won his first presidential election. Of course, he was not inaugurated in 2021, and there's too much controversy and much protest by many, including Trump himself. But now he has been resoundingly, as you say, indisputably elected. And what we have here is something that's interesting just in regard to the usual. Most of the time, if you're watching these inauguration ceremonies, it's always the same. It always takes place in the same place. There's a parade. It's all outdoors. But in an unprecedented break with tradition this year, Donald Trump, his second presidential inauguration, will move indoors to the Capitol Rotunda on Monday as severe weather has basically hindered them from going along with the usual plan.
No, absolutely. But I mean, it's a historic moment, not only for the US, but also for the world to have a new president, but in this case, a kind of former president actually then taking the realms and occupying the White House. And he already has some big plans for the state. So if we talk over some of those who are attending. So it says here, according to the JNS report under this headline, Trump's second inauguration, a pivotal day takes shape. So the decision to relocate the ceremony was driven by extreme cold gripping the East Coast, has transformed the usual inauguration arrangements. While the rounder will accommodate only 700 attendees, thousands will gather at the Capital One Arena to witness the ceremony being broadcast live. So those in attendance will be outgoing presidents such as Joe Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, former Presidents Barack Obama and George Bush, and an unprecedented gathering of technology industry leaders, including Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Mark Zuckerberg, and the Chinese Vice President will be there as well. We also see that Trump started his presidential inauguration that began at St. John's Church, which is just across the road from the White House, for a traditional prayer service, followed by a meeting with the outgoing President Joe Biden, First Lady Jill Biden at the White House. So let's see this little report of the need to actually pray for Donald Trump and his new administration as they've taken office.
Vice President Vance, Speaker Johnson, Senator Thune, Chief Justice Roberts, Justices of the United States Supreme Court, President Clinton, President Bush, President Obama, President Biden, Vice President Harris, and my fellow citizens. The golden age of America begins right now. My recent election is a mandate to completely and totally reverse a horrible betrayal and all of these many betrayals that have taken place, and to give the people back their faith, their wealth, their democracy, and indeed their freedom. From this moment on, America's decline is over. Our liberties and our nation's glorious destiny will no longer be denied, and we will immediately restore the integrity, competency, and loyalty of America's government. Over the past 8 years, I have been tested and challenged more than any president in our 250-year history, and I've learned a lot along the way. the journey to reclaim our republic has not been an easy one, that I can tell you. Those who wish to stop our cause have tried to take my freedom and indeed to take my life. Just a few months ago in a beautiful Pennsylvania field, an assassin's bullet ripped through my ear. But I felt then, and believe even more so now, that my life was saved for a reason. I was saved by God to make America great again.
Well, the inauguration featured an hour-long swearing-in ceremony featuring carefully selected elements of national unity, with Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh first administering the oath to incoming Vice President J.D. Vance. Chief Justice John Roberts then swore in President Trump, who chose to place his hand on two historically significant Bibles: his personal Bible from 1955 and the Lincoln Bible from 1861, previously also used by President Barack Obama. The first hours in office would see a repealing and plans to repeal swathes of Biden legislation within hours of taking office, as Biden has closed out his time with even preemptive pardons of various individuals, particularly who oversaw the handling of COVID. Dr. Anthony Fauci has been preemptively pardoned as well. Donald Trump has vowed to repeal much of Biden-era legislation within hours of taking office as part of his blitz of over 100 executive orders that he will sign in just the first few days. The soon-to-be 47th U.S. President, now 47th U.S. President, has said that he would roll back every radical, foolish executive order of the Biden administration on day one.
Now, it's quite extraordinary as well, and also we're seeing here as well that Trump has pledged to unleash a dramatic shift in immigration policy, and he's promised that the invasion of our borders, these are his words, will come to an end by the time the sun sets on the inauguration day. He says the move will involve at least dozens of actions rolling back Mr. Biden's strategy on the country's southern border with Mexico, CNN have reported. We see also that leading the efforts will be Tom Homan, who has vowed to end the catch and release scheme, a practice which migrants are released into the community rather than being detained while they wait a hearing on the first day of Trump's presidency. And apparently these have been going down very well with the American electorate, very well with Donald Trump's support base, because essentially what we have is a president and administration in power that is not globalist in its nature, is not looking to introduce WEF policies like Biden and Harris did. It's not looking to control the population and push that liberal progressive agenda that we saw under the previous administration. But effectively to have a more kind of a more free, the United States, more freedom of expression, and Americans feel like they're getting their country back again, and pulling the US out of the Paris Peace Accords, climate accords, all of these things that really hinder economic growth in America. We were seeing that this is what Trump wants to do, and he wants to rip up through executive orders all the previous mistakes made by Biden and Harris over the past 4 years.
Energy legislation, which would involve also removing regulations on oil drilling, the Paris Climate Agreement designed to limit rising global temperatures, which is a nonsense. It's impossible for humanity to hinder or impact or influence what's God's hand, what God is doing, and what's part of his plan, and the cycle, the natural cycle even, of how he works everything out. Even axing $7,500 tax credit that made electric vehicles more affordable. Trump is also is expected to dismantle the previous administration's federal government diversity and inclusion policies, which have wreaked absolute havoc across employment legislation in the U.S. We see people who are unqualified in some cases receiving jobs which they acknowledge they're not qualified for, even in some cases. And so we've seen preemptively people like Mark Zuckerberg, who was at the inauguration, already scrap DEI policies at Facebook. He's scrapped it. Nick Clegg, who was of late Lib Dem fame in the UK,
Deputy Prime Minister, yep,
had headed that up. He was a massive part of Facebook for a good bit of time. He has now moved on to friendlier shores for himself as the climate has changed at Facebook, and with Zuckerberg and that whole realm seeing that the winds of change could affect them if they don't get on board the Trump train.
No, absolutely. And in terms of foreign policy, we've already seen the Trump's influence with the hostage agreement, and it was the threat of Donald Trump threatening to unleash hell on those who are not pushing forward the hostage agreement, which I think Hamas felt the full wrath of his fury, knowing now that we have a strong president in the White House, not like Joe Biden, and also the prospect we're going to see the heavily exerted American power and influence on the world stage. And this will have a big impact on Israel and the Middle East.
And they'll see a return to an expansion, I'm sure, of that regional peace process, which we talked about back when it first began in, when we were talking in 2019, I believe, 2018 and 19, with the Abraham Accords, to include Saudi Arabia. Stabilizing the situation in Syria and Lebanon is a priority as well, reducing threats to Israel and the West, with success in these areas compensating also for some frustration, hopefully, over the unmet, arguably impossible to fully meet strategic goals in Gaza.
No, absolutely. So the big question will be will the Iranian regime still be able to pursue their ambitions to have nuclear breakout and require nuclear weapons under a Trump administration? And I think probably that was part of the agreement with Israel, because we know that as soon as Trump's envoy started putting pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu, it just took him a day to accept that agreement, even though it feels like Israel's having to pay such a high price in terms of Palestinian prisoners with blood on their hands to return to Judea and Samaria, to the Palestinian Authority, which is painful in order for the hostages to come home. So we already see his influence there. But again, it's one of watching and waiting to see how Trump responds to the globalists and what's going to happen in terms of British US relations. I know that Lamy is saying that he's got a great friend in Britain and everything else. So we're seeing the whole of the Labour ministers now backtracking on all the horrendous quotes and everything they said while they were in opposition, and now they're finding that they have to deal with Trump in the White House. And he's got, like Elon Musk as well, has got he's got his guns out for quite a few of our political leaders in this country as well. So it's going to be interesting next 4 years. So let's enjoy the ride.
Well, Nigel Farage was invited to the inauguration, but we have various members of the government who normally would expect to be invited who were not, who were not present. So that shows, Trump has never been one to. He's never been one to really quickly get over or forget. You could make the argument never really one to forgive over some of these things. So we'll see. There's a lot of relationship building that has to take place between the two.
Yeah. Well, moving on to our final topic of conversation tonight, and that is the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau by the Red Army on the 27th of January 1945. That also marks International Holocaust Memorial Day. And it's important that we cover this topic as well, primarily because it's extraordinary to think that 80 years have actually passed since the largest of all the Nazi death camps was actually liberated by the Soviets back on the 27th of January 1945. And yet today we see this unprecedented rise in Jew hatred around the world, where Jew hatred has effectively become a pandemic since October the 7th of 2023, the biggest mass terrorist attack in Israel's history and the largest number of Jewish people to be murdered since the Holocaust 80 years ago.
During the Second World War, we saw the Nazi regime responsible for the slaughter, the mass slaughter, murder of over 6 million Jews. And this is the greatest, the most significant of genocides in human history. The Russian Red Army found at Auschwitz 88 pounds of eyeglasses, hundreds of prosthetic limbs, 12,000 pots and pans, and 44,000 pairs of shoes. As the world pays lip service to the horrors of the Holocaust, this International Holocaust Memorial Day, the biggest act of genocide in the history of the world by the Nazis against the Jewish people, it comes at this time where we're witnessing a pandemic of Jew hatred across Western society that exploded after the horrors of October the 7th of 2023. It continues to be seen en masse on the streets of London and across our educational institutions, individuals who are targeted simply for being Jewish on a routine basis. The biggest mass terror attack against Israel in her modern history was, again, October the 7th. And within the same day, there were people who were lining up to celebrate what Hamas had done. And we're not just talking about people with some relationship to Gaza. There were people backing this and calling this a moment of liberation and power for the Palestinian people, in reference to over 1,000 individuals, Israeli civilians mostly, slaughtered on the day and hundreds taken hostage.
So going back to the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau by the Soviet Red Army, the Nazi death camp known as Auschwitz-Birkenau was literally responsible for over 1 million murders on industrial scale. The gas chambers are one. But I've also, recently read Ben McIntyre's book on the kind of history and the founding of the SAS, made famous by the SAS Rogue Heroes BBC drama. And what one of the stories talks about there is that the commander of the SAS, Paddy Mayne, and a few of the other SAS soldiers are the first to reach Bergen-Belsen, where they are absolutely horrified to discover this Nazi concentration camp, the treatment of the Jewish prisoners there that were half dead, and the smell of death that was around them. And the fact is that they met the German prison guards there who felt proud of what they did, which is beyond horrific. And this is when they actually then took the Nazi commandant captive, and then also brought in lots of the local civilians to show them what actually happened at Bergen-Belsen. Of course, then it was the army, British Army, that came in and then recorded on video for us. And that was important. It was recorded because they couldn't believe the horrors that occurred and the importance of getting this on film. So now we have, thanks to an interview that I recorded last year with Manfred Goldberg, who is a remarkable man who not only survived the Holocaust, but he playing a major role in terms of Holocaust education, giving up so much of his time to tell his horrific story, so the horrors of the Holocaust never happen again. And this is where he talks about his encounter with seeing Hitler in his German town.
Things I actually remember are very few. I recall my father taking a day off, and as a little boy, he would take me out for a day. That there was a lovely castle with a beautiful playground adjoining in our town of Kassel. We would go on the tram right up to the castle grounds and spend the day not so much enjoying the inside of the castle as the things that would interest youngsters. And I remember on one such outing, when it was time to go home, we, in the afternoon, began traveling on the tram, got off at our tram stop, and we were walking home when we turned the corner, and there was a huge, huge crowd of people standing there, blocking not the road, but the pavements and sidewalk adjoining, so that it was impossible to walk through. When my father inquired what was happening, they said, well, gosh, you don't know Hitler is coming through here, and we are here to greet him. Well, once the climate was such by then, I was born in 1930, this must have been about 1935 maybe, 34, 35. The climate was such that had we continued walking, having heard that Hitler was coming, it would have caused raised eyebrows, and we would have been sort of suspects of being perhaps anti-Nazi, which was not something you wanted to promote. So my father stopped dutifully, like everybody else waiting there. And sure enough, after a while, a motor cavalcade came past, and in one of the large limousines, there, large as life, stood Hitler with his arm raised in the Hitler salute. My father actually held me up in his arms so that I could look over the heads of people in front, and I distinctly remember getting a glimpse of him as he went by in this motor cavalcade. That was a vivid memory. And my father actually, like everyone else, had to raise his arm and shout Heil Hitler in order not to stand out.
A powerful witness there from Manfred Goldberg and yourself, Simon. An incredible story, and what a privilege it is for you to have been able to meet and present over the years several interviews with Holocaust survivors who are now few and far between.
No, absolutely, and I think what made Manfred's story so special was the fact that he's the only Holocaust survivor I've known or read about or even interviewed to actually remember seeing Hitler, which is absolutely frightening. And so he's such a gentleman. But there is one personality trait that virtually all the survivors have, and this is an incredible love for life. It's incredible. It's infectious. You know, they don't get down, they don't get upset, they don't hold grudges, they're not angry. And yet they want to live life, and by having children and seeing their families grow, that's how they defeat Nazism. That's how they defeat Hitler. And this is the irony, isn't it, that we're living in now, that we're living in a time where Holocaust education has never been at the fore so much in terms of public opinion. We see new films being made on it all the time, new documentaries being made, new books written, plays directed about the Holocaust. We see that come Holocaust Memorial Day, it's interviews with Holocaust survivors and events taking place is full in our national newspapers. And yet at the same time, we're seeing this unprecedented rise in Jew hatred. And it's almost as if the world has actually forgotten the lessons of the Holocaust, which is what starts with the Jewish people never finishes with the Jewish people. And if we don't protect our Jewish communities, then our own society and our own nation is in peril. And that's one thing I find absolutely extraordinary. But also this new wokeness when it comes to Holocaust education. The fact that the Holocaust can be considered now too political, or it focuses only exclusively on the Jewish people.
Well, it offends many people. If you are talking about or studying the Holocaust, people like to get and involve themselves in a significant range of whataboutery. Well, what about the Rwanda genocide? Okay, horrible, horrific. There can be a day, there can be some reflection to remember the Rwandan genocide. What about the Armenian genocide? Well, there are opportunities to remember the Armenian genocide. Right. These are horrific events. No one is denying that. We have done programs ourselves reflecting on those events precisely. But it's so critical. What it is people don't like the Jewish element.
Exactly.
And a significant number of people in our population, and you know who you are, you may be some of you watching this program right now, who question, deny, or diminish the impact of the Holocaust, right? Who act like this wasn't such a big deal. And this has become very trendy. Simon, it's in our churches, it's among Christian leaders. It's become a massive trend this year in 2024. We're seeing now open Jew hatred.
You mean 2025?
2025.
Yeah.
It began in throughout from October the 7th, 2023, we began to see this kick into overdrive, people wearying of the war and everything throughout 2024, and now here we are in 2025.
And Jew hatred, isn't it? It's completely irrational. It makes no sense, but we can see it going back to biblical times. We see, for example, Pharaoh didn't remember what happened to Joseph and why the Jewish people were in Egypt, because he'd forgotten his history and he didn't remember Joseph, who saved the nation. And so it's when we forget our history, and this is what we're in danger of now, because the number of Holocaust survivors who are alive are very few. There's going to be very, very few first-hand accounts of the horrors that took place in European soil over 80 years ago, and there'll be no one left to tell this story. So this is why it's so important that we understand history, but we also understand where Jew hatred leads us.
The problem is, Simon, that even if, I'm using the language of some people, they would say, oh, even if it happened that way, we're sure there's a reason. I know people who, it's not that they're Holocaust deniers, they're Holocaust sympathizers. There are individuals out there who believe that the philosophy of Judenrein, which was Jew-free Germany, perfect idea. And that's why we, as followers of Jesus Christ, the Jewish Messiah and Savior of the world, must recognize the place of honor that should be given to the Jewish people, from whom we have the law, the writings, and the prophets, from whom we have the oracles of God.
Amen. It's been great doing the program with you. Very much enjoyed it. Thank you, Regan. And I want to thank you for watching this unusual Behind the Headlines at Home, as we've unpacked 3 major historical events taking place this week. So pleased that the 3 Israeli Jewish women have been rescued, and they've come home to their loved ones and their families. Of course, President Trump is now America's 47th president, and we can't forget the horrors of the Holocaust that happened on European soil over 80 years ago. So thank you for watching this week's edition of Behind the Headlines.